Okay, let me just start off by, again, let me thank Senator Cornyn, let me thank Senator Cruz, and let me thank Congresswoman Sheila Jackson-Leaf for all being here, and then for all the other participants on this listening roundtable. Having said that, let me stop. If you have any questions to any of these personalities, this will be a good time.
Yes, I had a question for both of the senators. The topic of qualified immunity came up today. We didn't get a chance to really hear your thoughts on that topic specifically. Would you support any reforms to qualified immunity that would essentially make it easier for people to seek damages if they think they've been victimized by police brutality?
I think qualified immunity is something that the courts have been grappling with a long time. I'm not sure whether at this point Congress really understands enough about qualified immunity. I don't think most people understand that qualified immunity also protects school teachers, for example, all government workers. And so you start dealing with qualified immunity in this context, and you could well end up with unintended consequences. So I don't think this is the right time for us to do it. What I do support is additional follow-on hearings in the Judiciary Committee, and then once we understand what the lay of the land is, we'll be in a better position to do the right thing and not result in unintended consequences.
Well, and I can tell you on qualified immunity, we're having vigorous conversations right now in the Senate on that topic. I think there is concern about exposing police officers potentially to crushing litigation burdens and liability exposure. I can tell you an alternative that we have been discussing, and that was brought up actually at this roundtable. There's a Supreme Court decision called Monell that substantially restricts the ability of someone to sue a municipality when you have a case of a violation of their constitutional rights. And my staff has been working on legislation that would alter those standards, because I do think it is very important that there be a remedy. If someone's constitutional rights are violated, there needs to be a remedy, and that there should be, in the case of a willful violation of constitutional rights, the person who was victimized should be able to get redress and recovery. And we're having extensive discussions about how to expand the ability of someone who's faced a violation to get the recovery they deserve.
I have a question about, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, let me just say that the importance of being with the two United States senators is that we begin a discussion before we even go back to Washington. And I certainly was attracted to the Monell issue and Senator Cruz. That's something that I think, even though we're standing in City Hall, should be looked at. We have moved a bill out of Judiciary in the House, and we did look at qualified immunity, and we tried to look at it in a way that would be responsive to what the values of this nation is, and that is allowing a response if your civil rights and constitutional rights have been violated, that you would have a right to file a lawsuit against that individual who had violated your civil rights and constitutional rights. So I think there will be a lot of discussion on this issue, and it is an important issue. It's an emotional issue, and I think we need to find the right way, but we have got to give relief to some of those who have been harmed in the course of a public action.
I'm available to serve as a mediator at no charge. Next question, please.
Yeah, I have a question about body camera policy in the Justice Act. So obviously not all police officers have body cameras, but when they do, does this act create requirements for when the body cameras need to be used?
Who are you directing it to?
Well, that's a consistent message we got here today, and I think it's what we're hearing everywhere we go, is that there needs to be more transparency and accountability. And indeed, I think Senator Cruz mentioned if it hadn't been for the person filming on their camera George Floyd's murder, we wouldn't be here today, perhaps. So body cameras are something I think we need to get behind. I did hear from a number of the folks today saying there's a problem with obsolete technology. You know, this is a big challenge in a country of 330 million people to try to have a uniform standard for everybody, everywhere, especially when most of those requirements are imposed at the local level. So I think one of the most productive things we can do is provide some best practices, recommendations, and then also some money to allow the local police departments to implement their program, hopefully consistent with those best practices.
You know, one of the principal tools the Justice Act uses is it uses federal dollars that are going to law enforcement, and it uses those dollars to incentivize best practices and incentivize good behavior. And that can be a very effective tool in terms of changing how different departments are conducting practice. One element where it's incentivizing is body cameras. And I'm a big believer that body cameras are good for everyone. And, you know, at the roundtable, I made an analogy to fingerprints or to DNA. The criminal justice system should be about truth. It should be about understanding what in fact happened. You look at DNA testing, it can be incredibly powerful, to catch the guilty. If you have, say, someone who was raped, DNA can conclusively demonstrate who committed the crime. DNA can also be incredibly powerful to exonerate the innocent. And if you have someone wrongfully accused, DNA can get them out. I think body cameras play a similar role in this debate, that having a record of what actually happened. Part of the problem when you have a use of deadly force involving an officer is, if there's limited evidence, you quickly have potentially a he said, she said, and lots of disputes, and everyone has their own version of what may or may not have happened. Having clear video evidence hopefully can stop bad conduct before it occurs, and at the same time, it can be the principal means of defense if an officer did not engage in bad conduct. Having that record can protect the officer as well. And so the Justice Act is designed to incentivize body cameras being used more so that we have an accurate record of what occurred, and that ultimately should protect everyone's rights.
So to incentivize and not require.
Yeah.
So in the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, this is where you bring the two House and Senate together. It is a requirement provision that there be body cameras. Again, to just reinforce, we believe it is a tool that will help both civilian and police. And we're here to, again, reinforce that we are a nation of laws. But the good news is that we're a nation of compassion. And if you are serving as a law enforcement officer, you have a passion to serve. You're a first responder. If you are a civilian, you call the first responder to help you. So we want the meeting of those two concepts to be in a manner that creates more safety and security than conflict. And I think the body cameras requirement helps, and it also helps because many people may not be aware that there are 18,000 police departments, and they're not like 5,300 here in Houston, well-trained with the kind of leadership that we have. And they need this kind of requirement and guidance to help them be at the level of the passion for serving, and those who need to be served and need to be treated in the way that they are being served because they've called for help. So I think body cameras are very, very important, and that is why it is a requirement in the House bill.
As we just heard from the Congresswoman, they're saying how important body cameras are, and Senator Cruz, you just indicated that they're great for everyone. And credit to Mayor Turner, who in 2016 helped Houston become the largest city in the United States with body cams. There's been a lot of discussion and questions with regards to a timeline in releasing these body cams. How beneficial is it for everyone if there is no timeline on the transparency, and it's up to the departments at the end of the day whether or not to publicly release that video?
Let me just say first, all of this footage is available for all of the different components that are investigating these crimes. And so that's one positive aspect. You know, any law enforcement agency that wants to see it, the Harris County District Attorney's Office, you name it, any investigative authority, those are made available. As you also know, in most cases, the footage is made available to the families themselves whose loved ones may have lost their lives. And so we, in most cases, not necessarily in all, but in most cases, one of the charges that I'm giving to the task force on policing reform that we put in forth is to provide a criteria on when that footage should be released either to the general public, even if, for example, the family members, and you know, in many of these latest shootings, the family members themselves have said, we don't want this released. I mean, you release it to those who are investigating these crimes, but in terms of just putting it in general public, we don't want to. So there are some touchy issues there, and we need to work through that criteria. But it is important for all the body cameras, footage to be made available to all of those who are investigating, to make that available, not to hold it back from any of those entities. And then we just have to look a little bit more to what degree. The presumption should always be, and I've said this before, the presumption should always be that it be made available. So you start with that presumption, and then you work back from it.
I'd like to get Representative Lee, if you don't mind, ma'am, your comments on it from the national perspective. Yesterday, you issued a statement asking for the release of an internal audit here at HPD, saying that that should be released to the public. Do you believe that there should be a timeline? While the mayor talks about the city, federally, do you think there should be a better form of transparency? Because everyone, if we're talking about benefiting everyone, how does the person who's in Houston, who's not in law enforcement, how are they able to understand that they can trust their police department?
And before the congresswoman answer that, because it falls in my jurisdiction, and I'll let them take care of the national, and I'll certainly take care of what takes place in the city of Houston. I am reviewing that audit myself. I am reviewing that audit. And I now have seen the letter, for example, that State Representative Jim Wu has sent asking for it to be made available. And so being a former legislator myself, and when I've made requests, I certainly would like those information provided to me with the understanding that when we give it to the legislative process, they will understand the confidentiality of it. And so I will say to Chief Acevedo and to HPD, with respect to that audit, we will make it available to our legislators under the understanding that they will maintain the confidentiality. Because as I go through the audit, and I'm going through it now, you don't want to disclose the identity of officers who have been acting undercover and expose them to risk. But I do understand the importance of making it available to our legislative colleagues so that they can see it for themselves, and that is what we shall do.
I'd like to follow up with I know Representative Lee never got a chance to answer my question, which is why I was following up with her about the timeline and then overall your issue about transparency for everyone, not just for legislators.
Well, it's good to see that different levels of government can agree. What we're discussing in Washington is transparency. We're discussing it in the Senate. That's what I've heard this morning from our two U.S. senators. And we're having that as very important. So my first response, as I gave yesterday, is that the community should have an opportunity to deal with issues that impact them. At the same time, if I recall my comments, I indicated to engage with law enforcement on these decisions as well, and to make sure that these matters, whether it's body cam footage or whether it's an audit, are done so that law enforcement and the duties that they have can be upheld. Local policing is local government's territory, but transparency should be a national issue. And I think we can get there. I think we will get there. And what we will do is have a policing system across the nation that is grounded in transparency as well as grounded in the ability to do the job of safety and security for our communities.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Thank you again.
Thanks. That's an important point. You know, everybody wants to do everything out of Washington.